Welcome back, everybody. Another edition of the MNCAA podcast, Gophers edition, That Gopher Hockey Puckcast, episode 134. 134 episodes of doing talking Minnesota college hockey, and we hope to do 134 more of these. So, Nate Wells, as always, joining me, Drew Cove here on the MNCAA Gopher Show. We are coming to you now on a snowy day, at least in Minnesota. After the Gophers split with Ohio State, their first Big Ten series back in the fold after the winter break, and then a little warm-up series against Mercyhurst. And let's not look at what Army did to them this weekend, Gophers fans, but we'll talk about what the Gophers and Ohio State did. The Gophers. Let's say no one got the memo that the game started a little early on Friday. Not the Gophers, not the NCAA Twitter account that tweeted a reminder that the game starts in an hour after the first period was over. They moved it up because of Ohio State's football playoff game. I guess football's a big thing at Ohio State. Just learning this now, coming across the wire. But so the Gophers and Ohio State played early, I think 4 p.m. Central on Friday, and the Gophers got on the scoreboard destroyed. It was 5-1. It was 2-0, and then there was a 5-minute major penalty that the Gophers were able to have the advantage on, and they couldn't score. And then it was 4-0, and that was kind of all she wrote for that game. But as we'll get to it in a second, it was a little closer than the score might have indicated in both games. But Saturday as well, Gophers flipped the script. 6-1 final. Gophers just got a bunch of goals early on. It was 3-0 before the end of before the midway point of the first period. And a couple of goals just off of broken chances and some good opportunistic play. But Nate, your thoughts on the series, and obviously two very lopsided ones when it comes to the scoreboard. But interesting to see Ohio State in their own barn playing exceptionally well with the Gophers.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, we love college football here. It's come on, we're Minnesota 7-time national champs. Obviously. Great program in our lifetimes. No shame about that. Duke's Mayo Bowl champs, I believe.
Yeah, I think 8 straight bowl wins, longest winning streak in the nation. That so
I one day hope to be as excited in anything besides major life events as PJ Fleck was finding out that the mascot was Flavor Flav. That was. If you have not seen it, go find that. It is amazing. But this weekend was really it was a tale of two whoopings, where kind of a throwback to some of those Minnesota-Michigan series in recent years where, the Gophers took their lickings on Friday. They had opportunities and they could not take advantage of it. Most notably a 5-minute major, and did not do anything for that. Ohio State had their own 5-minute major and turned a 2-0 game right away into the beginning of the third period into 4-0, and that was pretty much all she wrote. And they took advantage of their opportunities Saturday early on. By the time the 10-minute break happened, it was already 3-0, and Ohio State was on their back heels. You had goalies look great. You had goalies struggle and be pulled. I think this is the first time we've had Nathan Airy pulled in the game all season. And just it a little bit is where I will say on Friday, we learned a little bit about Minnesota. We learned a lot about Ohio State, but I'll throw this one a little bit back to you, Drew. Is Friday's performance a little bit more on Ohio State or is it on Minnesota?
Boy, I mean, it is tough because I think it's a little more on Minnesota just because of the inability to capitalize. And I say this because I think this game was different than the games the Gophers lost because they got goalied. I think the Bemidji State and the Omaha game, those are both kind of goalie games. And I think their other two losses are really just the team, just kind of the Michigan State and Ohio State finding ways to shut them down in the ways that they do it best. And I thought Ohio State's neutral zone game, their aggression off the puck it forced Minnesota into so many dumps, so many bad passes, so many turnovers just throughout the ice Friday that they just never could. They could barely break out of their own zone, and they looked so hurried, and it did not work out well. And even though they got a ton of chances, and that's the thing too, as the game went on, they got more into the groove. But even just then, like they got so many chances just watching and just seeing the number of chances the bona fide scorers that the Gophers have had that night. They just weren't able to capitalize. So I think it's a little bit more on the Gophers just not being able to get through and push through for those goals, especially the 5-minute major. That's the place where you got to you got to score 2 there, especially when you're down 2-0 against a conference rival at this point, and probably the third best team in the Big Ten, in my opinion. And
that's a hot take. That's
I know
there's
a lot of Wolverines fans that listen to this podcast. I'm sure they love listening every single week to every segment of this show.
Well, you began this part by calling Ohio State Michigan, and then you upset Michigan by calling Ohio State the third best team. So if you're going to unite that rivalry together against you, you're doing a great job.
Exactly. There was an unseating. I mean, Ohio State certainly lost to Michigan when it counted at the end of the season in football, but for hockey, it looks like the fortunes are turning a little bit with the stability of Ohio State's roster and their ability to play the way they have this season. And I thought they certainly looked much better against the Gophers than Michigan did so far. But coming into just for this weekend, Ohio State just on Friday, they did. I do think it was Minnesota. I thought Ohio, not to discredit Ohio State's play, because I thought they capitalized where they needed to. And like you said, the 2 goals on their 5-minute major, but just Minnesota, you gotta, with the power play that they have, all the talent they have, when you're given those kind of opportunities to score and to have 5 minutes to score at will, basically, you gotta capitalize on those. And obviously, sometimes it's not going to happen. You're not going to win every single one. You're not going to have a perfect 5-minute power play advantage. But if you want to come back in that game there, ideally you want to score on it when you're not down 2-0. But certainly to stay in that game, they needed to score there, and they didn't.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit more Minnesota, but I want to give a lot of credit to Ohio State because, we've had for a bit where we're like, is Ohio State as good as their record? They have a similar aspect as Minnesota where, they beat the teams that are below them. They struggled against the teams that are higher than them or kind of in the area. They had one fluky weekend against Princeton. I think at this point we can just throw out as Thanksgiving leftover, hangover, whatever you want to call it there. But I will say on Friday, at times, especially during that second period, they really did look like a top 10 team. They're just limiting Minnesota's chances in ways that you haven't seen too often from opposing defenses. And the ones that are doing it are teams that are pretty much trying to play lockdown. It's we have a goal. We're not going to let anything happen. But you certainly saw offensive opportunities from Ohio State, and you saw that the Gophers were off their game in a way that I don't think I've really seen from Minnesota this season. I kind of have to throw out that second Michigan State game as an outlier, mostly just because we're still trying to figure out how much of it is, hey, they played a weekend with 16 skaters, or if it actually is Michigan State is the number 1 team in the country and ours is that good. But this game doesn't have that excuse. Minnesota brought back several players from injury. They have their 2 World Junior gold medalists back in the lineup, and this was the Gophers' full component, and it was pretty much the first time you can say that the Gophers laid an egg on the ice this season.
Yeah, Nate, as you mentioned, first time in 4 games, or in 2 series basically, that the Gophers had were able to ice a full roster. Axel Begley was able to go back, play defense again. Nick Michaels sat this one out, much to the chagrin of everybody who wanted to see.
He's getting multiple points. He had multiple points, and now he has to go sit again. Come on.
Exactly. But it was good to see Mason Nevers back out there. He ended up getting a goal in Saturday's game. Seeing Nevers as the first guy of the injury bug to come back. August Falloon and Cal Thomas still out, which I think are both very integral pieces. But the Gophers, they came back and they looked flat with the full lineup. And I think a lot of people were expecting, including myself, that, all right, the Gophers are going to come out. They're going to have all their options. They have Moore and Zemer back. They have the chance to blow the doors off them. And the complete opposite happened. But it was interesting too, because we talked about it a little earlier, Nate, is that Nathan Airy, that was his first loss of the season. First loss of the season for Nathan Airy. That shows how good the Gophers have been on Fridays this year, and how sound he's been playing in goal. But it was just a very, very interesting Friday night game. And I thought, like, Jimmy Clark, looked really good in the Friday game. He was really fast. He was one of the few guys I thought was able to break into the zone. But it was just, just hard to get past their goalie. And not saying that they got goalied, but I thought, yeah, this is, like you said, it was the first time that the Gophers definitely looked flat against a conference, against any opponent, really.
Yeah, no, it was a good goalie performance, but they did not get goalied, and
Mm-hmm.
that'd be a disrespect for Ohio State on
Exactly.
that end. But yeah, it's just I mean, it was really nice to see what is close to a full lineup for the Gophers, and just a lineup that you can recognize, as opposed to, hey, let's just plug in where we can and hopefully things will work out. The funny thing is, I think we sat here last week and we're like, this will help the Gophers in the long run because people have been playing above the roles, people have been playing with other people. And it almost felt like for a bit on Friday night, it was like the exact opposite, where, you know what, we're back together and we still have to relearn how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to see how kind of it was a little bit of a feeling out period at the start, especially. I think there weren't a whole lot of shots in the early goings, and then just kind of fell on Ohio State to end up pulling away with it and kind of leaving Minnesota in the dust at that point, and kind of too much of a lead to insurmount. But Nate, that's enough on Friday. Let's move to Saturday, and let's say the Gophers film session on Saturday would have been uncomfortable, but it worked. The Gophers came back on Saturday's game. Mike Kester gets a power play goal right out of the gate, basically. And that Gophers didn't look back from there. They ended up scoring 3 power play goals in that game. Obviously, I think that's absolutely a direct response to the failings that they had on Friday and their inability to come back. But they laid it on with 3 power play goals, 2 from Kester, a few multi-point nights from a lot of guys across the roster. But they just looked in control, and while Ohio State looked a bit more frantic in their own zone, the Gophers looked calm, collected, and they looked like they were just a step ahead in the department of really understanding where the puck was going to be and being in the right places to capitalize on those either mistakes or miscues or just flat out, I mean, good passes, and they're just getting in the way and kind of taking the opportunity for themselves.
It was seriously, this weekend, it was a tale of 2 whoopings, but in this case, it was more of just a tale of making the most of opportunities, where the Gophers, they drew a great penalty early on and made the most of that, making it 1-0, and just continued to put their foot down and roll past it. By the time you hit 10 minutes, you're up 3-0. And, at that point, you are in control of the game, and they had Ohio State on their back foot. Again, I don't even think it was, I didn't think this was a bad performance by the Ohio State goalie. I didn't think it was a great performance. It's kind of just more of, it shows this is where the Gophers are when they're at their best. Friday night shows what happens when the Gophers struggle to kind of define what they're able to achieve and make the most of opportunities, and go against a team that can kind of match them on that aspect. But in terms of just Saturday, where it really, a lot of it kind of goes through, they were getting offense from the blue line, where Kester is looking fantastic there, both the power play and just regular there. Middlestat got some things going there, and just making the most of second and third chances where plays were breaking down, passes were being made, and keeping power plays going, where just anytime it felt like Ohio State made a mistake, Minnesota was going to step up and be like, hey, this is our game. We are going to make the most of this. And this game is going to look a lot more lopsided than the actual game was.
Exactly. And speaking of guys that came back, we already mentioned it a little bit with Mason Nevers, but I thought he looked really stellar in the game on Saturday, creating a lot of chances. And his line mate, too, Beckett Hendrickson. I thought those two playing together looked like a revelation for not just Nevers kind of getting involved, but Hendrickson, I thought, looked better than he has in any game all season. And a lot of times, sometimes I've seen games where he's taken penalties and taken a couple penalties in one game and kind of looked a little disjointed on his offense and his kind of placement around the ice. But he was aggressive. He was able to. He forced a couple of turnovers and a couple of takeaways that he had. I mean, one was a good assist on the Nevers goal, but then another was almost a pseudo breakaway that he kind of just sent the puck to the middle of the ice where Nevers is waiting to take a shot, and the goalie was able to match him there. But I thought he created a lot of chances, and it's good to see Hendrickson a bit more involved, especially from the freshman standpoint, when the Gophers have had so many freshman standouts so far this season that Zemer and Falloon, I think, specific, and Paulson too.
Also,
All three of those guys have all made significant impacts in various different areas that I thought of the way the team has found success this year. But to see kind of Hendrickson coming along as well, to see him finding a partner that's that hopefully helps him a little bit along the journey, a guy who's had a lot of experience. But I just thought those two on the ice together, it made Hendrickson's game look a lot more complete, in my opinion.
The toughest thing, especially coming into college hockey, is finding that consistency weekend in and weekend out. And I mean, this is the time of year where it's going to be kind of cliche where coaches will be like, well, they're no longer freshmen now. They've been in college hockey now. We're considering them sophomores. They have the experience. And you hope that a player like Beckett Henderson kind of is able to take what he's learned, the good, the bad from the first half, and get a little bit more of a consistent action. And the Gophers have kind of been spoiled in a way where Falloon, when healthy, Paulson, when healthy, had been those older guys who just completely get into the lineup and find a little bit more of that consistency right away in game one, game two. Where you mentioned Paulson there, where I think he's again had kind of a nice quiet weekend. It just feels like the last 3 weekends that he's played, both before and after his injury, he is a solid part of that lineup, and you hope that Hendrickson, you've seen bits and pieces, even just in the games where you see some good, you see some things to improve upon, just can maybe find out a little bit more consistency. He's not alone in that. I feel like we're kind of harping on Oliver Moore a little bit for that same thing last year.
Oh yeah.
Hopped on Jimmy Clark. We've hopped on Brody Lamb. It's a tough transition to be a freshman in college hockey. And it really does help to play with an experienced player like Mason Nevers, who, again, it was great to see Mason Nevers back, and it was even better to see him get a goal, and kind of maybe get a little bit of monkey off his back. Just it hasn't been the easiest year for him, and I'm sure just having the game Saturday that he did is certainly going to give a little bit more confidence as the Gophers turn to the second half of the Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, and especially as you mentioned, the freshmen kind of having that either growth period or having impact right away. I think Falloon, Paulson, those guys have been so. I guess they've been ready earlier, or they've been more impactful earlier than I think a lot of freshmen can be expected to be ready to in this type of scenario. So, and I think that's why the Gophers are kind of performing as well as they are so far this season. Is that a roster that is constructed the way this is, and to have those big impacts from freshman guys that a lot of times, like, all right, you're gonna kind of you're at the mercy of how experienced and how well adjusted your freshmen are going to be early in the season, to say, okay, are they going to take a whole year, or are they going to take a half a year to get ready, get used to the system and used to the game? But to jump in right away and to have all those guys make significant impacts right from the start, I think that's kind of helped elevate Minnesota, and showing that, all right, when we have all these freshmen that are ready to jump in and play like they've been here for a long time, that's going to elevate the roster and elevate the team to a little bit higher of heights than might be expected otherwise. And that's not to say that Hendrickson is behind on the freshman schedule at all, but I just think those other guys have come in so just like cookie cutter ready to go, that it helps Minnesota so much to be able to have a guy like Hendrickson to kind of find his way and to find his right partner to come in and hopefully in the second half of the season really, really make an impact.
It's also the difference between coming in and being a 21-year-old freshman versus being just a year plus outside of draft age. So
absolutely,
you certainly kind of in that middle ground where, I mean, you've seen it too, where at times where some of the younger freshmen too, who are just outside their draft year, you don't have that kind of consistency. You see the flash. I always think, kind of, for me, that's one of the things last year where you saw, like with that Oliver Moore, that the things that work for you at the junior levels with the U.S. program do not always work at the college level, and finding what works takes time. It's fail, and it stinks because you have to test yourself, improve yourself by failing and going over and over again to see what works on a level that is very public and trying and by trial and error. And in the case of Oliver Moore, it's certainly, we've seen that consistency. And I think you kind of see it at times with like the Brody Zemer, and just you're getting those work in week in and week out. So it's certainly it's something where it depends kind of on the role, depends on where you are in your development, but also just kind of also an age thing of development. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're Bob Moscow, why you're happy that you're bringing in an August Falloon who's an older forward, why you're bringing in Eric Paulson who hit his stride in the USHL in his age 20 season. So like these are kind of the differences where you expect an Eric Paulson to kind of hit the ground running a little bit more than you would for a Beckett Henderson.
Exactly. It's why, I mean, as we mentioned before, the Jimmy Clark transition from being a guy who wasn't intended to be there last year. And he obviously had his moments, but certainly kind of room to grow as a freshman. And I think that season last year is kind of, he took a lot of different things from last season to build upon this one. And I think he's obviously come back a really good sophomore. At least in my opinion, he's been, and even just this weekend, he looked like one of Minnesota's best forwards throughout both games, consistency wise. But it was really good to see a guy like that, and maybe that's kind of the path that Hendrickson might want to follow into to kind of his impact into next season on this Gophers team. But Nate, to kind of put a bow on this series from the weekend here, Jimmy Snuggerud, Luke Middlestad, Connor Kurth, all with a couple of each. Just good, consistent. Like it seemed like so quiet that I mean Snuggerud's goal looks pretty great, but it was another quiet weekend from some of the big guys, but it's like, all right, they still were a point a game player over the course of the weekend going forward.
When you were talking about Jimmy Clark there, like having like a really nice weekend there, I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, he did. I think pretty much other than Jimmy Snuggerud, who at this point, like we're taking his consistency for granted because pretty much about a year ago, this is like what everyone was really hoping to see from Jimmy Snuggerud is to be that consistent player on a game in, game out basis, as opposed to, hey, I think last year he was the Big Ten first star of the week when he went to Ohio State and he just kind of took off and everything. And then had 2 or 3 weeks where he just completely disappeared. And this season, it's just, we're like, oh yeah, that's a multi-point game by Jimmy Snuggerud. He got a great power play goal, whatever. Jimmy Clark looked good though.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's like Snuggerud quietly 30 points in 24 games. He's got 12 goals. I think he's somewhere in the top. He's close. If he's not in the top 5 of scoring nationally, he's on the precipice. He's on the cusp. But he has been a lethal this year, and it certainly has flown under the radar because it has been so consistent. Because it's not like, all right, wow, Jimmy got 3-4 points on the weekend. It's like, no, he has 3 points every weekend basically, and it's no surprise at this point. He's certainly been just a complete player coming back for the Gophers this year. And I think it's certainly, like we mentioned last week too, it's been beneficial for him that he's been able to come back and kind of refine areas of his game. And I thought he's definitely the kind of leader that leads by example for this Gophers team that says, all right, we need a goal. We need an impact moment. I'm your guy. And Jimmy Snuggerud has been fitting the bill that a lot of people wanted him, they were saying, oh, I really, really want him to fill that role last year. But I think everyone's got their own progression. And I think he certainly has fallen into that stride this year exceptionally well.
Yes, and just an update from me quickly checking my phone for the stats while you were talking there.
Yes.
Jimmy Snuggerud, 3rd in the nation in points right now as we record this.
That's pretty good company, people. And
yes,
that'll put him in conversation for many different for a few different awards at season's end if it keeps up this way. And that's kind of the key too, is Jimmy making sure it stays consistent in the second half, because last year that was a little bit of something that kind of a lot of teams are able to figure him out come second half. And that's not trying to say that he's a one-dimensional player, but the teams that saw him before, they were much more prepared to see him the second time, and finding ways to effectively shut him down. So it's just a matter of taking that second half of the season here and kind of showing that he can do it. He can be that complete guy that he's been all season long for the last couple months here. But Nate, let's move into around the conference. First full weekend, the Gophers are the rest of the Big Ten is kind of back in action. Number 1, Michigan State came back to defeat Penn State 6-4 on Friday. That's with an empty net goal. They tied 2-2 the next day. Penn State took the shootout. What do you think, Nate, about that series and just how Penn State is kind of able to to stick with it against the number one team in the country that certainly had a lot of participation at the World Juniors and has certainly has yet to show any reason why they're not still having a good hold on the number one spot in the nation.
This was a tough weekend for teams near the top of the rankings in the pairwise. Obviously, we just said Michigan State took four of 6 points against Penn State, losing the shootout. They needed to get 3 goals to get the win on Friday night. They were down for a time. I still feel like Penn State, I don't know if it's just a bit of a sleeping giant or just they're missing like one thing where they need to learn to win. And I keep waiting for it. So I don't know if it's this weekend is something that maybe we start to see things changing or if the Nittany Lions just are who they are. But Michigan State struggled on Saturday. Boston College lost to Merrimack.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into Michigan in a second. Minnesota obviously got killed Friday. Ohio State obviously got killed on Saturday. I'm trying to think. Somebody Maine had a couple of really close games.
Mm-hmm.
So like it just feels like no one really was able to kind of just separate themselves and have that great weekend near the top. So it just I don't know if this is just where college hockey is or everyone just kind of face the struggles. It's tough. It's tough to look dominant in 2 games
Mm-hmm.
in college hockey, no matter where you are, no matter who you're playing. But it is something to see where Michigan State they're able to pull it off Friday on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But for 4 or 6 points, that 1 point certainly makes a difference right now, but we'll see where losing a couple points or 2 against a team like Penn State, where that leaves them at the end of the season.
Yeah, and we've said it for years now, I think, in that the Big Ten is just a conference that, I mean, you'll play the non-conference, and then once you get to November, they'll just beat up on each other, and that seems to be what's happened, like clockwork for the Big Ten this season. Is that just no matter how good a team looks, this conference is going to be very, very hard on itself in terms of that competitiveness, and that even the team that is one of the worst in the conference is going to give the number one team in the nation a pretty good fight. And it just shows that I think how well balanced the Big Ten is. For all intents and purposes, it's obviously there's some teams that are worse than others, as we'll get to for the Gophers' upcoming opponent. But I think it is just interesting to see that all these teams are able to kind of hang with each other, even though Penn State is just on the cusp of the bottom third of the pairwise rankings, and Michigan State's at pretty much the very top. So very interesting to see, and especially nationally too. I mean, Minnesota and Ohio State go back and forth with whoopings because they're both top 11, top 10 teams in the country, and that shows the level of parity at the top. I think there's just more and more really good teams at this level in this stage of at this stage of college hockey, and it's really cool to see that the number 10 team can find a way or the number 11 team can really just destroy the number 3 team like that, and it's not as much of a gap between those as it might have been in the past.
This does not feel like a year where you're looking, you're like, all right, I can tell who the top 3-4 teams are, and they're a step ahead of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have an idea where everyone is going to land, but there really doesn't seem to be that much of a difference between that top tier and kind of the next 2 tiers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and moving on to the rest of the conference here, Wisconsin undefeated on the weekend. They played against BYE. Oh, the bye. All right. They played the bye this weekend.
Yeah.
So no games for Wisconsin. But then the Gophers' upcoming opponent, Notre Dame and Michigan, they split. The Wolverines won 5-3 Friday after facing a 2-0 deficit. And then the Irish came back and won 7-4 Saturday with Justin Janicki hat trick, which was very impressive from that Notre Dame team to put up. And they haven't been as lackluster offensively as I think their identity had been over the last few years. But 7 goals, still a feat, even against a team as typically porous as Michigan's defense. And that's all I'll say about that.
I've thought more highly of Michigan's defense this year, and then they give up 7 goals to Notre Dame. So you know what? And in fairness, that last one was like a buzzer beater to get a hat trick, which reminds me, I think at the time, I think it was Connor Riley, like that. He did the empty netter in Notre Dame, like right as the buzzer went, and then they spent like 5 minutes to like look into it to see whether or not it counted or not accounted. And it was one of those things where I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just finish this. I want to know the final score so I can send this out and put it like in beat deadline.
Exactly. But interesting weekend from those two teams, and certainly implications for the Gophers' upcoming opponent. But let's go through before we talk a little bit more about Notre Dame. We'll just go through the Big Ten standings. I know as it's really a Big Ten play the rest of the way here. So as we show here, it's Michigan State in the lead in 12 games played. They have 28 points. Minnesota is very close behind, same amount of games, 27 points. Ohio State in third with 23 points. Wisconsin not too far behind them, 20 points, but in 14 games. So not the advantage of games left to be played there on their side. Michigan with 18 points, Notre Dame with 9 points in 14 games, and Penn State bringing up the rear with 7 points in 12 games. Nate, as we just see here, Notre Dame certainly falling behind the pack when it comes to Big Ten points to be banked the rest of the season. What do you think? What do you think the Gophers and Notre Dame have this time around? The first, as you noted, first repeat opponent on the Big Ten schedule so far for the Gophers.
Yeah, the Gophers have gone through the entire Big Ten now. We've seen all 6 teams. The rest of the way, it's going to be another set of the 6. It will certainly be interesting to welcome the Fighting Irish back to their second home of Minnesota. Jeff Jackson's final appearance there. I'm always reminded every time that Notre Dame goes to Minnesota. This was it was Dylan Malmquist and the Fighting Irish won because it was there. The Fighting Irish won and Mariucci. It was Dylan Malmquist, and we're talking like Eric Vigo and I are talking to him after the game. He's one of like the Edina. I think it was like Edina had bought out like a bunch of seats like for their youth hockey system. So like, there was a bunch of people there, everything there. Yeah, we're talking to him about that, like how it was cool or anything for there, and like 4 or 5 like Notre Dame players over around behind him and just start chanting Edina, 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 and I'm like, I was like, apologies to the first 2 Mighty Ducks movies. This is the most cake eater thing I've ever been a part of in my life.
Hey, I mean,
but this is always my Notre Dame like memory of going there. There's also the time where I think Casey Millsat scored with like either in overtime or very close to the end of the game, where it was like a 1-0 game, and it was like I have to come up with words to write about this game, and it was like the most boring game. It was the most boring game that like I've ever covered.
I mean, in terms of let's remember some guys. This is my entry in remember some guys for the week. Gopher killer Nate Lieberman. Oh, Edina native.
No. He's eating Prairie.
He's eating Prairie. Sorry,
yeah.
I got my suburbs wrong.
I think not only that, I think he played with Casey Middlestat. So like,
I mean, Nate Lieberman, he never scored except against the Gophers.
The Gophers. First goal of the
season came against the Gophers, I think 2 years in a row or something like that. It was,
and he was one of those guys who felt like he was there for like 8 years.
Yeah,
he just kept showing up, and you're like, you played with Casey Middlestat, and we're in like the 2020s or something. We're like
Mason Yobst second.
Yeah,
second, really, or Tanner Lazinski the second.
He's one of those guys. I was when we're going through the points or whatever. I'm like, the points are. It was like Isaac Howard leads right now, and then number 2 is Jack Devine, who is like the opposite of. He's a guy who I'm like amazed as a senior because he feels like he's been a freshman for like 3 years in Denver. Because I think like because about 2 years in like if there's like a good year or so where he was the youngest player in college hockey as a freshman, then he felt it's like he was still really young. So he's like a 20-year-old like senior or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Gosh.
So like he's the opposite. But yeah. I think Lieberman there is like certainly a guy who like he felt like he was there forever. And then you get the stretch of brothers.
Yep.
Because like they're on like because Janicki 2, Slagger 3. I mean, plus their dad's been the assistant for forever.
Exactly. Yeah, it's hard to get away from some of those familiar names. But Nate, kind of moving on to what the Gophers are up against. Fighting Irish, as we mentioned, they won on Saturday, but that's only their second win since November 1st of 2024. That's a long stretch to just get a couple of wins. They're 2-12-1 in their last 15. So Nate, this is kind of the question you posed in our notes, and I'm gonna throw it right to you. Is 6 points a must this weekend for the Gophers?
I feel like it. I don't like to say that 6 points is a must, but it feels like the Gophers have the opportunity to put a little bit of pressure on Michigan State and just kind of prove to themselves that, hey, we can have a great weekend of conference play. They're not going to get too many better opportunities the rest of the way. So this feels like a good opportunity for Minnesota to take 6 points. And yeah, you mentioned it's 2 wins, and I think one of those wins was Harvard in like the Friendship Four. So they literally they literally went over 2 months without a win in North America. The Gophers were able to take it to the Fighting Irish in South Bend. And as we've seen with Minnesota, where, they've been able to bounce back from disappointing periods and disappointing games in the case of Saturday, I think this is just an opportunity to see the Gophers in a little bit more of a lower pressure situation, but be able to make the most of it, because it picks up from here, and they're going to have to continue to build momentum as the season builds up into a crescendo.
As you mentioned, Nate, bigger things on the horizon, not to overlook Notre Dame, but I think a big, successful 6-point weekend for the Gophers this weekend against Notre Dame is imperative for building confidence to face the next weekend against Michigan State. That's going to be a pretty interesting benchmark, especially now that the Gophers, knock on wood, that they're going to have their full complement roster. It's going to take a lot for the Gophers to not have a full 12 forwards probably for this next series. But it is interesting to see that the Gophers do have that Michigan State is coming up again so soon. And I think building your confidence this weekend with that full roster, maybe put together 2 full games of what they did against Ohio State on Saturday, and they'll probably be sitting pretty for the Michigan State series, but not saying they got to overlook this one. They have to put together a 6-point performance to make sure that they're setting themselves up the best they can for Michigan State the weekend after.
Yeah, knock on wood. You just want to find out, be like, oh, hey, mumps or something crazy that like pops up. It's been that kind of season. What was it? Mumps? I feel like you're recovering this with me too, where I was like the Wild had something going around there, and it was like, oh yeah, the Wild used his locker room like 2 weeks ago. Just a heads up, everyone. And we're like, oh come on, really?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's the Gophers have had certainly worse luck than most years when it comes to injuries, but largely, as we've talked about before, they've largely overcome that. So, and obviously their first kind of laid an egg loss against Ohio State came with that full roster.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the big laid egg loss. The player I'm really curious to see how he bounces back, and it's also something we found out a little bit about in the last Notre Dame series is Nathan Arey, where you haven't seen him be pulled in a game like that and have that sort of performance. Against Notre Dame, he kind of struggled early on in the Friday game, was able to settle down, and Bob gave him the Saturday game as an opportunity to kind of see what happens when he bounces back. Like, I'm kind of curious to see, hey, what happens there on Friday? Does he get that opportunity? How does he perform as far as things go? You're going to need to know what you have in your goalies with this time of season as we near the playoffs. So I'm curious to see how Nathan Arey does. I thought Liam Soulier, credit for him for stepping in on Friday and getting the opportunity to play well on Saturday. But just for me, that's kind of the curious thing to see what happens with Nathan Arey. We saw for the most part the rest of the team bounce back pretty well on Saturday. Obviously, as the score indicates. But it's kind of funny. We keep seeing this with Nathan Arey and Notre Dame.
Exactly. It'll be an interesting series, Nate, as always, and certainly it'll be really, really good to see the full roster go against Notre Dame, and yeah, like you said, to see Arey, to see what chance he gets to bounce back, to see kind of what they do from a goaltending standpoint. But it'll be a very interesting series to watch. We'll be there tracking it for you all to talk about next week, kind of in a big podcast before the Michigan State series, the second Michigan State series. So for I think we'll end it here, Nate. For Nate Wells, I'm Drew Cove. Thanks again to everybody for listening to the MNCAA Gophers Show.